"Not yet," she said, and the whole room stopped breathing. Ryan Mitchell had pulled a stranger from a burning wreck on a highway. He never expected her to look at him across a hospital room and call him her husband. He never expected to stay. And he never expected that the most powerful woman in New York City would say two words that would change everything he thought he understood about his own life. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and follow every part until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The nurse had been on shift for 11 hours when she pushed open the door to room 412 and saw him. He was not what she expected. Most of the people who had come through that door over the past 4 days wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases and spoke in the clipped, controlled tones of people who billed by the hour. They asked questions with the precision of surgical instruments. They stood at the foot of the bed and studied the woman lying in it, the way a man studies a balance sheet looking for damage, calculating loss, deciding what could be salvaged. This man was different. He was sitting in the chair pulled close to the bed, not at the foot, not at a professional distance, close. The kind of close that meant something. His elbows rested on his knees and his hands were folded in front of him, and he was watching the woman in the bed with the quiet, steady attention of someone who had decided he was not going anywhere until he was certain she was all right. He had been there since Tuesday. The nurse had noticed him the first morning, a tall man in a plain gray jacket, not expensive. Nothing about him that announced importance or wealth or access. He had asked where the coffee machine was. He had thanked her by name after she showed him. He had been the only person in 4 days of visiting executives and assistants and board members and attorneys who had asked her how her shift was going. She had liked him immediately. Now she looked at the monitors, made her notes, checked the IV line, and glanced at the woman in the bed. Evelyn Carter, CEO of Carter Global Foundation. One of the most recognized names in New York healthcare, and saw something she had not seen since the accident. Evelyn Carter's eyes were open. The nurse moved quickly but calmly to the bedside, checking pupils, checking response, asking the standard questions in the standard order. Evelyn answered each one, her voice rough with disuse, her eyes moving slowly around the room. Taking inventory. Cataloging exits and information, the way the nurse supposed a woman like her cataloged everything. Then Evelyn's gaze settled on Ryan. He had stood up the moment her eyes opened. He was standing now with his hands slightly out from his sides, the posture of a man ready to move if she needed him, but holding himself back because she hadn't asked. The nurse smiled. She had seen a lot of bedside vigils in her years. She had seen the difference between people who sat with someone because they were obligated, and people who sat with someone because they genuinely could not imagine being anywhere else. She looked at Evelyn. "Your husband is wonderful," she said warmly. "He has barely left your side." The words fell into the room like a stone into still water. Ryan's mouth opened. He took half a step forward, both hands rising slightly, the universal gesture of a man about to correct a significant misunderstanding. "I'm sorry there's been a mistake. I'm not—" And then Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes were clearer than he expected. She had been unconscious for 4 days. She had been through surgery, blood loss, a trauma the doctors had described with words that Ryan had not fully understood, but had understood enough. She should have been disoriented, confused, grateful simply to know what day it was. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he could not entirely read, steady and deliberate, and something else underneath that he didn't have a word for yet, and she said, "I know." 2 words. She was not confused. She was not concussed into agreement. She was not misunderstanding what the nurse had said. She had heard it, and she had chosen it. The nurse smiled again, made a final note, said she would send the doctor shortly, and walked out of the room. Ryan stood exactly where he was. The door closed. The silence was so complete he could hear the hum of the monitors, the faint sound of the hallway beyond the door, his own breathing. Finally, he said, "What did you just do?" Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, some of the steadiness had softened into something that looked remarkably like exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, though there was plenty of that, but the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. "Sit down," she said. "I'd rather stand." "Mr. Mitchell." She paused. "Ryan, please sit down. I'll explain everything. But I need you to sit down first, because if you're standing there looking at me like that, I'm going to feel like I'm being interrogated, and I have had a very difficult 4 days." Despite everything, the confusion, the sheer absurdity of the situation, he almost smiled. He sat down. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "How much do you know about what happened to my car?" she asked. "I know what I saw," he said, "which was your vehicle going through a guardrail on the I-87 extension at approximately 7:40 in the morning. I was behind you. I stopped. I got you out." "Did the police tell you anything about the cause of the accident?" Ryan hesitated. "They said they were still investigating." "Did they tell you why?" "They said the initial findings were inconclusive." Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. "That's a very diplomatic way to say that someone tampered with my vehicle." The room changed. It didn't change physically, but Ryan felt the quality of the air shift, the way it shifted at accident scenes, that particular charge, that meant the situation was more serious than it first appeared. "You're telling me this wasn't an accident," he said. "I'm telling you the investigators believe it was not an accident." She said it precisely, carefully, the way someone says something they have been rehearsing the language of. "The brake system showed evidence of interference. The investigation is ongoing. No conclusions have been reached. But the people who work for me, the people who have access to my schedule, my vehicle, my building's parking structure, they know an investigation is happening. And you think someone inside your company is responsible." She didn't answer directly, which he was beginning to understand was its own kind of answer. "4 days ago," she said, "someone leaked to the financial press that I had been involved in a serious accident. The story ran within 6 hours of the crash, before my surgical team had finished operating on me, before anyone outside my immediate executive circle had been officially notified." She paused. "That is not a coincidence." Ryan leaned forward slowly. "Who leaked it?" "I don't know yet." She looked at him steadily. "But I know what it means. Someone wanted people to know I was vulnerable. Someone wanted the board to start thinking about succession. Someone wanted the narrative to begin before I was even awake to shape it." He sat with that. Then, "What does this have to do with what you just did?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "When you have that level of exposure," she said finally, "when someone is specifically trying to isolate you and make you look alone and unstable, a stranger becomes a liability. Someone who was present at the scene of an unexplained accident, who has no official connection to you, no contractual relationship, no background that has been vetted." She stopped. "A stranger can be used against you very easily. They can be made to look suspicious. They can be approached, pressured. They can be made into a story that hurts you." Ryan stared at her. "You're saying you lied to that nurse to protect me?" "I'm saying I made a calculation," Evelyn said. "If you are my husband, you have a defined relationship to me. You have a reason for being in this room that is immediately understandable to everyone who walks through that door. You become someone with standing, someone that people think twice about approaching or manipulating." She held his gaze. "If you are a stranger, you are exposed." "I didn't ask to be protected," Ryan said. "No, you didn't." Something crossed her face that he couldn't name. "You also didn't ask to pull someone from a burning car and spend 4 days in a hospital waiting room. But you did." He looked at the floor. "I stayed because the paramedics asked someone to stay," he said. "Because you didn't have anyone with you, and they needed a contact person, and—" He stopped. "And," she said quietly. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't entirely know how to finish it. The truth was more complicated than he wanted to explain to a woman he had met unconscious on a highway shoulder. "You have a daughter," Evelyn said. Ryan's head came up sharply. "How do you know that?" "You left your phone on the table by the window on Wednesday night. It lit up. The contact name was Emma, and then under it said 7 years old, allergies, penicillin, amoxicillin." She paused. "You wrote her medical information as her contact name in your phone." He hadn't realized he'd done that. It had been automatic. After Sarah died, after he'd started managing everything alone, he'd started doing 100 small things like that without thinking: backup systems, redundancies, information placed where it could be found quickly in an emergency. "Yes," he said. "I have a daughter. Her name is Emma. She's been with my sister this week. And she needs her father home. She always needs her father home." The weight of that sentence hung between them. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. He was tired. He had not been sleeping well in the chair by the window, and he had been pretending to himself that he was staying for rational, logical reasons, because the hospital had asked him to, because it felt wrong to leave someone alone when they had no one else but sitting here now, looking at a woman who had just made a calculated decision. With the composure of someone who hadn't been unconscious for 4 days, he was beginning to think that maybe the rational explanation didn't quite cover it. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said. "Nothing dramatic," she said. "I'm asking you not to correct the assumption, not to confirm it, not to perform anything, not to—" She stopped, and for just a moment, the calculation faltered. "I'm asking you to let people believe something that helps keep us both a little safer while the investigation runs its course." That is a significant thing to ask of someone you've never met. "I know. You don't know anything about me. I know you pulled me from a vehicle that was about to catch fire," she said. "I know you stayed for 4 days when you had no obligation to. I know you have a daughter whose medical history you keep in your phone in case someone needs to reach her in an emergency." She held his gaze. "That tells me something." "It tells you I'm a decent person," he said. "It does not mean I want to walk into a corporate war zone pretending to be your husband. I understand. I have a life, Evelyn. I have a job. I have a kid who has already lost one parent and does not need her father tangled up in—" He stopped. "Whatever this is." "I understand," she said again, and then quietly, "I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm not asking you to fight anyone. I'm asking you to let a misunderstanding stand for a few weeks. Nothing more." Ryan looked at her. She looked back at him. She was thinner than she'd looked in the photographs he'd seen, the ones on the hospital's board in the lobby. The foundation's name on the wall outside the building. The news results that had come up when he'd searched her name after the accident. In the photographs, she was polished and certain, the embodiment of a woman who had built something real from nothing. In this bed, she still had that quality, that core of steadiness, but it was stripped of performance. Whatever she presented to the world, whatever armor she wore in boardrooms and press conferences, it was not here in this room. What was here was just a person. A tired, injured, frightened person who was trying to protect herself with the only tools she had available. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I want one thing." "Name it." "Emma does not get involved in any of this. She doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't get exposed to any of it. And the moment any of this gets anywhere near my daughter, I'm done. No argument, no negotiation, done." Evelyn nodded immediately. "Agreed. And the moment the investigation is over." "The moment it's over, you walk away. No strings. No obligations. No one will know anything." He nodded once slowly. And that was how Ryan Mitchell, hospital equipment specialist and single father of one 7-year-old girl, agreed to become temporarily, conditionally, and in full knowledge of the absurdity of the situation, the apparent husband of one of the most powerful women in New York City. He did not realize, standing there in that hospital room on a Thursday morning, that some things you agree to temporarily have a way of becoming permanent. He did not realize that the investigation was going to take longer than anyone expected, and he did not realize that the person lying in that bed was going to be far harder to walk away from than he could possibly have anticipated. The first complication arrived before Evelyn was even discharged. Her assistant, Marcus, efficient, loyal, and visibly shaken by the sight of Ryan, appeared in the doorway on Friday morning with a tablet full of messages and the expression of a man who had been mentally composing difficult conversations for days. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "the board has requested a status update. Nathan Blackwood specifically has been asking." "What has Nathan been asking?" "He's asking whether you are fit to resume operational decision-making." Marcus glanced at Ryan, then back at Evelyn. "He's also asked whether your current circumstances have introduced any complications that the board should be aware of." Ryan felt Evelyn go very still beside him. It was remarkable, he thought, the way she did that. It wasn't rigidity, it wasn't shutdown. It was more like she gathered herself from the outside and pulling every scattered piece of herself back to center until what sat in that hospital bed was not an injured woman managing fear, but something that looked remarkably like absolute composure. "Tell Nathan," she said, her voice perfectly level, "that I am recovering well, that my current circumstances are entirely personal, and that the board will have a full status briefing when I am medically cleared to deliver one." He'll push for more specifics. He always does. A pause. "Tell him my husband is keeping me very well informed about my recovery timeline, and he can direct further questions to my attorney." Marcus blinked. His eyes moved to Ryan. Ryan met his gaze and said nothing. "Yes, Ms. Carter," Marcus said finally. He turned and left. The door closed. Ryan exhaled. "Your husband," he repeated. "You agreed," Evelyn said. "I agreed not to correct the assumption. I didn't think you were going to start actively using it as a message." "I'm always active," she said simply. He looked at her. "Who is Nathan Blackwood?" Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Not fear, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like a person calculating the exact distance between themselves and a threat. "He is my business partner," she said. "He has been with the company for 9 years. He is very good at what he does, and he has wanted operational control of Carter Global for the last 3 of those 9 years. And you don't trust him." "I trust him with revenue projections and market analysis." She paused. "I do not trust him with anything that matters." "Is he the one who—" "I don't know," she said it flatly. "Honestly, I genuinely do not know. And that is the most frightening thing I've woken up to." Ryan sat back. He thought about Emma. He thought about the agreement he'd just made. He thought about the look on Marcus's face when Evelyn had said the word husband, that particular cocktail of surprise and assessment. The rapid internal recalculation of a man figuring out what this new variable meant for everyone in the building. I thought about how 4 days ago, he had been driving to a 7 a.m. equipment calibration appointment at Mount Sinai Radio on coffee in the cup holder. Thinking about whether Emma's soccer cleats needed replacing before Saturday's game. And then the car in front of him had gone through a guardrail. And here he was. "I need to call my sister," he said. "And I need to call my daughter. And then I need to get Emma's cleats ordered because her game is in 9 days, and if I wait any longer, they won't arrive in time." Evelyn stared at him. He looked back at her calmly. And she said with what he could have sworn was the beginning of something that almost wanted to be a smile. "Of course." He made the call from the hallway. Emma answered on the second ring. "Dad." Her voice was exactly what he needed, direct and warm, and completely unimpressed by anything complicated. "Aunt Julie said you've been at the hospital. Are you okay? Did you get hurt?" "I'm completely fine, baby," he said. "Someone else got hurt. I was helping." "Oh." A brief silence, the sound of cartoons in the background. "Is the person okay now?" "She's going to be." "Good." Emma seemed satisfied by this. "Dad, can I have a sleepover at Aunt Julie's on Saturday?" She said. "It's okay if you say okay?" "I say okay." "Yes." He could hear her fist pump from across the city. Also, Biscuit threw up on the rug again. Aunt Julie was pretty upset about it. "I'll deal with the rug when I get home." "When are you coming home?" And there it was, the question that landed in his chest the way it always did, the way it had landed since Emma was 3 years old, and asking it from a doorframe because she'd had a nightmare and he was the only parent left to come running. "Soon," he said. "A few more days. But I'm coming home." "Okay." She trusted him completely. He had spent 4 years making sure she always could. "I love you, Dad." "I love you more, Em." He hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the closed door of room 412. He thought about what it meant to promise someone you were coming home. He thought about how for a few weeks the woman behind that door needed someone to be present for her, the way Emma needed him to be present for her, not as a resource, not as a strategy, but as a person who was simply there. He thought about how that was something he understood. He went back in. Evelyn was on the phone when he returned. Her voice was different in a way he couldn't immediately categorize, sharper, faster, stripped of the careful deliberateness she used with him. This was a different register entirely, the voice of someone navigating a structure he didn't have the map to. She ended the call when she saw him. "The doctor is releasing me tomorrow," she said. "Good. My apartment has a second bedroom." She said it without looking at him. "It would be easier. For the appearance of things. You could—" "No." She looked at him then. "I have a daughter," he said simply. "She comes home from my sister's on Sunday. I'm not going to be the father who disappears into a stranger's apartment for weeks." "I understand." She paused. "What would work?" I thought about it. "We figure out what we actually need people to believe, and we don't overcomplicate the rest. I'll be around. I'll be at whatever things you need me at. But I go home at night. That's workable. And I need to know what we're walking into." He sat down again, leaning forward, forearms on knees. "Not the edited version, the real version. Who are the people in your life? Who do I need to be believable to? What are the landmines I need to not step on?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You're more strategic than I expected," she said. "I've been a single parent for 4 years," he said. "You learn to anticipate problems." Something moved across her face, something he wouldn't have caught if he hadn't been watching closely. Not quite surprise, not quite recognition. Something between them. "All right," she said. She straightened against her pillows. "I'll tell you everything, but I need you to understand that some of it is complicated, and some of it is ugly, and some of it might make you want to walk out." "Try me," he said. She was quiet for one beat. Then she said, "My company is worth $400 million. I built it in 12 years. I have 47 employees who depend on it for their livelihoods. I have no family. My parents are both gone. I have no siblings. I have people who work for me, and I have people who want pieces of what I built, and I have—" She stopped. "You have," he prompted. "I have not had a single person in 3 years who I was confident sat across from me wanting nothing." She said it plainly, without drama, without self-pity, just the simple reporting of a fact. Everyone wants something. It's not their fault. It's the nature of power. But it means that every conversation I have, I'm also managing the conversation. Every relationship I have, I'm also managing the relationship. And I am—" She stopped again, and this time he waited. "I am very tired," she said finally, "of managing." Ryan was quiet. "You didn't manage me," he said after a moment. "That first day. You didn't know who I was, you didn't know what I wanted, and you called me your husband anyway." "That was strategy," she said. "Part of it was strategy," he said. "The other part was trust, whether you knew it or not." She looked at him like he'd said something in a language she was only beginning to learn. "That's a generous interpretation," she said. "Maybe." He shrugged. "Or maybe you're not as calculating as you think you are." She opened her mouth, closed it. He almost smiled again. "Get some sleep," he said. "You're getting discharged tomorrow. We should probably figure out what story we're telling people before you walk back into that building." "We have time. Evelyn." He said her name for the first time without thinking about it, without reaching for it. It came out natural the way names do when you've been around someone long enough for the distance to close. "The man who may or may not have tampered with your car knows you're awake. He knows you're coming home. The clock is already running." Her expression changed. For just a moment, she looked like exactly what she was, a woman alone in a hospital bed trying to outthink someone who wanted her gone. "You're right," she said quietly. "I usually am about emergencies," he said. "Occupational habit." This time she smiled. It was small. It was brief. It disappeared almost immediately, folded back behind whatever architecture of composure she usually maintained. But Ryan saw it, and he stored it somewhere, the way you store something rare, not because you plan to use it, but because it matters, and because something tells you it might matter even more before this is over. He reached for his jacket. "I'll be back at 7, he said, "before the doctors start their rounds. We'll have time to talk before Marcus arrives." "Ryan." He paused at the door. She was looking at him with that expression. He still didn't have a word for that quality of seeing and being seen that made him feel briefly and uncomfortably like the distance he had built between himself and the rest of the world over the past 4 years was a great deal more visible than he'd realized. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the accident. Not for staying. Just—" She stopped. "Thank you for sitting down when I asked you to." He looked at her for a moment. "Get some sleep," he said, and he walked out, and the door closed behind him. And in the hallway of that hospital, Ryan Mitchell stood for a long moment, with his hand still near the door handle, looking at nothing, trying to identify the feeling that had settled in the center of his chest. It was not quite concern. It was not quite loyalty. It was something older and quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of a person who has just made a commitment they did not entirely plan to make and found, unexpectedly, inexplicably, that they did not regret it. He was not her husband. He was not her protector. He was not in any official or rational sense part of her story at all. But walking down that hallway toward the elevator, he found that he was already thinking about Tuesday morning, and the board, and Nathan Blackwood, and the look on Evelyn Carter's face when she had said, "I am very tired of managing." He found that he was already planning, and Ryan Mitchell, who had spent 4 years planning only for Emma, for soccer cleats, and penicillin allergies, and bedtime routines, and the particular shape of a life built carefully around one small person's need for a father who showed up, was surprised to discover that there was still room in that careful life for something else, for someone else. He didn't name it, not yet, but it was there. Ryan arrived at 7 as promised. He brought 2 coffees from the cart on the ground floor, one black one with cream, because he'd noticed on Wednesday that she'd asked the nurse for cream, and he pushed open the door to room 412 to find Evelyn already sitting up, tablet in hand, reading with the focused concentration of someone who had absolutely no intention of behaving like a person who had spent 4 days unconscious. She looked up when he entered. He held out the coffee with cream. She took it without a word, and for just a moment, something crossed her face that was not quite surprise and not quite gratitude, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "You remembered," she said. "I notice things," he said. "It's a hazard of the job." He sat down in the chair that had over the past 4 days shaped itself to him, or shaped him to it. He wasn't entirely sure which, and he wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at her. "Tell me about Nathan Blackwood," he said. She set down the tablet. Outside the hospital was beginning its morning routine. Voices in the hallway, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the particular institutional energy of a building that never fully slept and never fully woke. In room 412, the morning felt different, quieter, more like the inside of a conversation that mattered. "Nathan joined the company 9 years ago," she said. "He came from Meridian Capital. Very strong background in acquisitions, market positioning, investor relations. I hired him because he was the best person for the job, and because I needed someone who could speak the language of the boardroom while I focused on building the operational side. And it worked. For 6 years, yes. The company grew significantly during that period. Nathan is—" She paused, choosing carefully. "He is exceptionally intelligent. He understands value. He understands leverage. He understands how to make people feel they are getting exactly what they want, while he positions himself for what he actually wants. Which is control." She said it simply. "Nathan has never been interested in building something. He is interested in owning something. There's a difference. I didn't see it clearly enough early on." Ryan watched her. "When did you see it?" "About 3 years ago. We had an acquisition offer, a firm in Boston, solid healthcare analytics company. Undervalued but fundamentally strong. I wanted to acquire and integrate. Nathan wanted to acquire, strip the assets, and sell at a premium." She held her coffee without drinking from it. "It was the first time I understood that we were not building toward the same thing." "What happened?" "I declined the strip and sell strategy. We acquired and integrated." She paused. "The Boston team are still with us. 43 people who would have been unemployed. The analytics division they became is now one of our strongest revenue generators. Nathan never forgave you for that." "Nathan never forgave me for being right," she said. "There's a distinction." Ryan almost smiled. He caught it and drank his coffee instead. After that, she continued, things shifted. Gradually. The way things shift when someone decides they are waiting for an opportunity. Nathan became careful. Very professional. Very present in exactly the right ways. He built relationships with 4 of the 7 board members over the following 2 years. Nothing improper. Nothing I could point to. Just dinners, golf, the kind of social architecture that powerful men build when they're planning. Planning for what? For me to make a mistake, she said. Or to stop being the story. She looked at him steadily. A woman building a company is a story. A woman who is powerful and successful and in control is a story. But a woman who is injured, isolated, possibly emotionally compromised. She stopped. That is a different kind of story. One that certain kinds of men know how to use. Ryan leaned forward. You think he arranged the accident. I think someone who wanted me vulnerable and isolated and unable to respond, had the opportunity, the access, and the motive. She put down the coffee. I am not making an accusation I cannot support. But I am also not pretending the pattern isn't there. The door opened. Both of them turned. Marcus appeared in the doorway, and behind him, not quite entering the room, standing in that precise position that powerful men use when they want to appear casual, but actually want to establish that they are present and watching, was Nathan Blackwood. He was taller than Ryan had imagined. Expensive suit. The kind of face that was handsome in a way that had clearly been managed and maintained over decades. Eyes that moved quickly, cataloging everything, the cups, the chairs, the proximity. Ryan, and returning to Evelyn with an expression of practiced concern. Evelyn. His voice was warm, carefully warm the way a fire is carefully controlled. You look well. Better than I expected, honestly, given what you've been through. Nathan. Evelyn's voice was perfectly even. I don't recall inviting you this morning. The board has been concerned. He entered the room now, moving to the foot of the bed, stopping there in the executive position. Ryan had noticed on other visitors the foot of the bedstand, the balance sheet posture. His eyes moved to Ryan. And I see you have company. You see my husband, Evelyn said. Nathan Blackwood looked at Ryan. Ryan looked back at him. Something moved through Nathan's expression. A recalculation rapid and barely visible, the movement of a man who had walked into a room expecting one arrangement and found another. Ryan Mitchell, Ryan said. He did not stand up. He did not extend his hand. He simply said his name and held Nathan's gaze with the calm, unhurried steadiness of a man who had pulled people from burning vehicles and knew exactly what a real emergency looked like. This, his expression said, is not an emergency. I wasn't aware, Nathan said carefully, his eyes moving back to Evelyn, that you had, that there was someone. There are a great many things you aren't aware of, Nathan. Evelyn's voice carried the slight elevation of warmth that made it somehow colder than ice. That's appropriate. Not everything about my life is company business. Nathan's jaw tightened. It was minimal, barely visible, the reflex of a man accustomed to controlling his responses. But Ryan saw it. Of course, Nathan said. I only wanted to express the board's concern and let you know that we are prepared to support any transitional arrangements you might need during your recovery. I won't be needing transitional arrangements, Evelyn said. I'll be back in the office within the week. The doctors have cleared you for... The doctors will clear me, she said, because I am recovering well, as my husband can confirm. She looked at Ryan with an expression that was to anyone watching the expression of a wife drawing her husband into the conversation. To Ryan, it was a precise and deliberate signal. He met it. She pushed herself too hard on Wednesday, he said to Nathan, shifting into the register of a husband reporting with mild exasperation on a wife's stubbornness. Wanted to read through quarterly reports. I hid the tablet for 3 hours. Marcus, standing near the door, made a small sound. Nathan Blackwood looked at Ryan with the expression of a man encountering something he had not prepared a response for. She'll be ready when she's ready, Ryan continued. And when she is, she'll let the board know. A silence fell in the room. Nathan smiled. It was the precise smile of a man who was recalculating rapidly behind perfectly arranged facial muscles. Wonderful, he said. Evelyn, I look forward to having you back. Ryan. He said the name with the particular inflection of a man trying to decide what category to put something in. It was good to meet you. He left. Marcus lingered for one moment, looking at Evelyn with an expression Ryan couldn't fully interpret, something between admiration and alarm, and then followed. The door closed. Evelyn exhaled. It was the first time Ryan had seen her exhale like that, a real breath, not a performed one, not the controlled breathing of a woman managing herself in front of an audience, a real release. He didn't know, Ryan said. About me. He genuinely didn't know. No, she said. Which means whoever leaked the accident information to the press did it before they could be certain I had no one with me. They assumed. She paused. They were wrong. Ryan set down his coffee. He's going to investigate me. Within 48 hours, she said. Maybe less. And he's going to find a hospital equipment specialist with a 7-year-old daughter and no connection to any world you operate in. Yes, that's either going to reassure him, Ryan said slowly, or it's going to make him suspicious in a different way. Because a woman like you doesn't marry a man like me without a reason, and a man like him is going to spend a significant amount of energy trying to figure out what the reason is. Evelyn looked at him. You're right, she said. So we need a story, Ryan said. Not a complicated one. Simple is always more believable. How did we meet? When? How long have we been married? Who knows? She was quiet for a moment, and he had the distinct sense of watching someone who was accustomed to having every answer reckon with the fact that she had not prepared this particular answer. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I'm very good at strategy. I am not good at... She stopped. Normal things, he offered. Personal things, she said. Things that are supposed to be natural. Ryan leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. All right, we met a year and a half ago. Through the hospital, I do equipment calibration at several of the facilities your foundation supports. That's documentable and entirely believable. We kept it quiet because you were concerned about how it would look publicly, a CEO in a relationship with someone in a supplier role. That's exactly the kind of thing I would be concerned about, she said slowly. We got married 6 months ago. Small, private. You didn't want it to become a news story. He paused. Does that work? She was looking at him with an expression he was beginning to identify, the expression of someone encountering something that worked well enough to be slightly unsettling. That works, she said. Emma, he said. My daughter. She calls you. He stopped. What would she call you? Evelyn blinked. It was the first time he'd seen her genuinely caught without a prepared response. It landed differently than all the other moments of recalculation, quieter, more interior. She could call me by my name, she said carefully. Children don't always... She'd call you Evelyn, Ryan said. She calls all adults by their first name because I raised her to do that, rather than Mr. or Mrs. anything. It's less formal. More respectful, I think, because it treats people as people, rather than titles. Evelyn looked at him. You've thought a great deal about how to raise a child. I've had to think about everything twice, he said. Because there was no one else to think about it. The weight of that settled between them, not uncomfortably, but with the particular gravity of a true thing said plainly. Evelyn is fine, she said quietly. For Emma. He nodded. The morning moved around them. The hospital sounds. The light changing the muffled world outside the window, going about its business of being entirely unaware of the conversation happening in room 412. Ryan finished his coffee. Evelyn drank hers slowly. They talked through the specifics, dates, locations, small details that would make the story breathable, the kind of granular texture that made invented things feel real. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Ryan became aware that they had stopped talking about strategy. He had asked her casually about where she grew up, because background details needed to feel natural, he'd told himself. And she had said Ohio, and he had said Ohio. And she had looked at him with genuine surprise for the first time and said, what part? And he had said Columbus, and she had said Cleveland, and they had spent 20 minutes in a conversation about Ohio that had nothing to do with Nathan Blackwood or Carter Global or any of it. He only realized when the doctor knocked that they had been talking for 2 hours. Not performing. Talking. He stepped into the hallway to give her privacy for the examination, and he stood with his back against the wall and his empty coffee cup in his hand. And he thought about the way she had laughed quietly briefly, the way someone laughs when they've been surprised into it, when he'd described Emma's first encounter with snow. It had been the most unguarded thing he'd seen from her. He filed it away. Not strategically, just because it mattered. The doctor emerged, nodded at Ryan with the automatic professional warmth of someone who had accepted the husband explanation entirely, and said Evelyn could be discharged that afternoon. Ryan went back in. "This afternoon," he said. "I heard. Do you have someone who can—" "Marcus will arrange the car. And when you get home, is there someone—" "Ryan." She looked at him. "I have managed alone for a long time." "I know," he said. "I'm not questioning your capability. I'm asking because you had surgery 4 days ago and managing alone. When you're at full strength is very different from managing alone, when you have a healing incision and probably more fatigue than you're admitting to." A pause. "My housekeeper comes Tuesdays and Fridays," she said. "Today is Friday," he said. "Yes." "I'll take you home," he said. "I'll stay until you're settled and your housekeeper arrives. Then I'll go." She looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to?" "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm offering." Another pause, longer. "All right," she said. He nodded and reached for his jacket. "Ryan." He paused. "The things I told you this morning," she said. "About Nathan. About the company. About—" She stopped. "I don't tell people those things." "I know," he said. "I'm not entirely sure why I told you." He considered that. "Maybe," he said slowly, "because I haven't asked you for anything. And when nobody's asking you for anything, it's easier to just—" He shrugged. "Say true things." She looked at him for a long time. "That's a very simple explanation," she said. "Simple things are usually true," he said, "in my experience." He left to call his sister while Marcus arranged the discharge paperwork. In the hallway moving toward the elevator bank, Ryan dialed Julie's number and waited. She picked up on the first ring. "Ryan Daniel Mitchell," she said. "It has been 6 days. 6. Emma has asked me 11 times when you're coming home, and I have run out of creative answers. I know, I'm sorry. I'm coming this afternoon." With an explanation. With a partial explanation. "Ryan, Julie." He kept his voice low, conscious of the hallway. "I need you to trust me on something. There's a situation. It's complicated, and it's temporary. But for the next few weeks, there might be some things I can't fully explain." A silence. Julie had known him for his entire life. She had been there when he and Sarah had met, when they'd married, when Emma was born, when Sarah had gotten sick, when she had died. She had been at the airport when he'd landed from the funeral, with a 3-year-old on his hip, and no earthly idea what came next. She knew his silences the way you know the silences of someone you have watched carry things they shouldn't have to carry. "Are you in trouble?" she said. "No." "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Is Emma going to be safe?" "Absolutely. That's non-negotiable." Another silence. Then, "Okay. Just that. Okay." He loved his sister with a fierceness that was almost embarrassing. "I'll explain what I can when I can," he said. "And Julie, don't mention this to anyone. The situation I'm in, just don't mention it." "Ryan, you're making me nervous." "I know. I'm sorry. Everything is fine. I promise." He hung up and stood for a moment in the elevator lobby. Then his phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. He opened it. 6 words. "You don't know who you're protecting." He read it twice. His heartbeat did not accelerate. This was something the job had given him the ability to encounter alarming information and stay in his body, stay level, make the next right decision rather than the reactive one. He looked at the number. Unknown. No further information. He screenshot it. He thought about showing it to Evelyn immediately and decided against it. She had a discharge to get through, a car, to get into a trip home, to manage while healing from surgery. He would show her when she was settled. He would not add to the weight she was already carrying until she was somewhere stable. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to get her. She was already dressed when he returned. Clothes. Marcus must have arranged everything fitting with the particular precision of a woman who knew her own measurements and planned accordingly, even from a hospital bed. She was standing rather than sitting, which he suspected was a choice rather than a comfort, a refusal to be seen leaving in the position of someone who needed help. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ready," he said. "I've been ready for 4 days," she said. He almost said something about the stubbornness of that. He decided it could wait. Marcus appeared with the wheelchair, which Evelyn looked at with the expression of a woman encountering a personal insult. "Hospital policy," Ryan said before she could object. "I can walk." "I know you can. Sit down." A beat. She sat. Marcus caught Ryan's eye over the top of her head and made an expression that was unmistakably respect. The discharge took 40 minutes. Paperwork instructions. The quiet bureaucratic processing of a person back into the world. Ryan stood through most of it, answered questions when Marcus deferred to him as her husband, and noticed without acknowledgement, without comment, that Evelyn had stopped correcting it, not performing it, not leaning into it, but no longer correcting it. The elevator, the lobby, the automatic doors opening to a New York afternoon that had no idea anything unusual had happened. A car waiting at the curb. Ryan helped her in. He got in beside her. Marcus sat in the front. The city moved around them. Evelyn sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the window, and Ryan watched the side of her face and thought about the text on his phone, and thought about Nathan Blackwood's recalculating eyes, and thought about Emma's soccer cleats, and the size she'd been wearing in September, and whether she'd grown since then. He thought about how in his experience the moments that changed everything rarely announced themselves. They drove for 7 minutes before Evelyn spoke. "I want to ask you something," she said. Her eyes were still on the window. "And I want you to answer honestly." "All right." "When you agreed this morning to the arrangement," she paused, "was any part of it because you felt sorry for me?" He thought about that. He gave it the real consideration it deserved. "No," he said. She turned from the window then. "No. I felt concern," he said. "I felt something like anger on your behalf because what's being done to you is wrong. I felt—" He stopped, found the word. "Responsible. Because I was there. Because I know what I know. And walking away from someone in a real emergency has never been something I'm built for." He paused. "But not sorry for you. No." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why not?" "Because you don't need anyone's pity," he said. "You need someone who can stand next to you without flinching. Those are very different things." Something moved through her expression, deep, brief, the movement of something that had been still for a very long time. She turned back to the window. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When the car stopped in front of her building, glass and steel, a doorman who straightened when he saw the car, a lobby that was visible through the front doors, as marble and intention. Ryan got out first and came around and opened her door. She got out carefully. He did not offer his hand until she was standing and had taken one step and stopped just slightly with the controlled expression of someone managing pain they had underestimated. He offered his arm. She looked at it. "Hospital policy," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. She took his arm. They walked into this building together. The doorman held the door. The lobby attendant nodded. The elevator arrived immediately, the way elevators in buildings like this always did, programmed for efficiency and deference. Inside the elevator, Evelyn released his arm. They stood side by side, not quite touching. 18, she said. He pressed it. The elevator rose. He reached into his pocket. He took out his phone. He opened the screenshot. "I need to show you something," he said. "I got this in the hallway before we left." He held out the phone. She read it. He watched her face. She read it again. Then she handed the phone back and looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. 6 words, she said. 6 words, he confirmed. A pause. "They're watching," she said. "Yes." They know you were at the hospital. Yes. They're trying to frighten you away. That would be my interpretation, Ryan said. The elevator opened on the 18th floor. Evelyn stepped out. He followed. She stopped in the hallway outside her door and turned to face him. Her expression was doing something complicated, the rapid interior work of a woman, recalibrating, reassessing, deciding something she had not fully decided before. I owe you an additional honesty, she said. Okay. When I agreed to the arrangement this morning, she stopped, started again. I calculated that having you visible was protective, that your presence created a structure that made me harder to attack. She held his gaze. I did not calculate that they would come after you directly. I should have. I am sorry that I didn't. Ryan looked at her. Evelyn, he said. I pulled you from a burning car. I've been at that hospital for 6 days. Whoever sent that text, they were always going to notice me. That's not your calculation error. That's just the situation. It's still my responsibility. We can share it, he said. She blinked. You don't have to carry everything alone, he said. It came out quieter than he intended, more direct. The tone he used with Emma when she was trying to carry something too big and pretending it wasn't heavy. You've been doing that long enough. This, whatever this is, we're both in it, so we both carry it. The hallway was completely still. Evelyn Carter, who had built a $400 million company by carrying everything herself, stood very still and looked at him, and Ryan saw something in her face that he recognized. Not because he had seen it in Evelyn before, but because he had seen it in himself. In mirrors in the dark, in the particular quality of 3 a.m. silences, when Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, and the weight of everything he'd chosen to carry became briefly unbearably visible. It was the expression of someone who was so accustomed to being alone that the idea of not being alone had stopped being an option they knew how to reach for. All right, she said, softly. We carry it. She turned and opened her door. He followed her in, and the door closed behind them both. And outside in the city, in a building Ryan had never identified and couldn't have named someone, was looking at a phone with 2 words typed and not yet sent. He stayed. The cursor blinked. The message was deleted. And a new calculation began. The housekeeper's name was Rosa, and she had worked for Evelyn for 11 years, and she took one look at Ryan standing in the living room and burst into tears. Not the delicate, manageable tears of a professional who had learned to control herself in difficult situations. Real tears. The kind that come from relief so physical it has nowhere else to go. Mrs. Carter, she said, though she was looking at Ryan. I have been praying every night since the accident. She pressed both hands to her chest. And you stayed with her. You stayed. Ryan opened his mouth. Evelyn said from the couch, where she had carefully lowered herself. Rosa, I need tea. And whatever you made on Thursday, the soup if there's any left. It was a redirect, so smooth it barely registered as one. Rosa turned, immediately composing herself with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned that Evelyn Carter's way of accepting care was to ask for something specific so that the care had somewhere to go. Ryan waited until Rosa was in the kitchen. She's been with you 11 years, he said quietly. Yes. Does she know about? Rosa knows nothing about any of it. She knows I was in an accident. She knows I am home. That is sufficient. Evelyn paused. She is not part of this world. I would like to keep her that way. He understood that instinct immediately. Some people you protect by keeping them outside the radius of the thing you're managing. He'd done the same with Emma every day for 4 years, building a perimeter around her small life, keeping certain realities outside it, not because she was fragile, but because she deserved to not carry things that weren't hers. He sat in the chair across from Evelyn. You need to rest, he said. I need to think. You can do both. I cannot do both. When I rest, I stop thinking, and right now, I cannot afford to stop. Evelyn. He leaned forward. Your body was in surgery 4 days ago. Your thinking is only as good as the brain running it, and that brain is currently operating on inadequate sleep and hospital food, and the sustained adrenaline of someone who has been managing a crisis from a horizontal position for the better part of a week. He held her gaze. Rest. The thinking will be better for it. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who was used to arguments and had genuinely not expected that one. Rosa appeared with tea. Evelyn drank it, and 20 minutes later she was asleep on the couch. Ryan sat very still and watched her breathing even out, and he thought that of all the things he had witnessed in the past 6 days, this might be the most remarkable Evelyn Carter, who controlled everything in her visible radius, surrendering to exhaustion in front of someone she had met less than a week ago. He took the text screenshot out of his phone and looked at it again. You don't know who you're protecting. He thought about what that meant. Not the threat, the phrasing. Not who you're protecting yourself from. Who you're protecting. Which meant someone believed Ryan was protecting Evelyn deliberately. Not accidentally, not circumstantially. Deliberately. Which meant someone was watching closely enough to know the difference. He called Julie, told her he'd be home by dinner. Then he sat quietly in Evelyn Carter's living room and thought about his daughter's soccer cleats, and the text on his phone, and the woman sleeping 10 feet away from him. And he stayed until Rosa confirmed she had everything handled. And then he stood, and he found a notepad on the kitchen counter, and he wrote 7 words and left it on the coffee table, where Evelyn would see it when she woke up. I'll be here at 8. R. Then he went home. Emma was at the door before he finished unlocking it. She hit him somewhere around the midsection. She was getting taller. He noticed it used to be the knees, and he wrapped both arms around her and held on in the way he always held on, with the full specific gratitude of a man who knew exactly how lucky he was to have this particular 7-year-old in his particular life. You smell like hospital, she announced into his jacket. I spent a lot of time at the hospital. Is the lady okay? He pulled back and looked at her face. Brown eyes. Sarah's exact nose, the expression of someone asking a real question and wanting a real answer. She's going to be, he said. Good. Emma nodded with finality. Aunt Julie made lasagna. There's some left. There's always some left when Julie makes lasagna. Because she makes too much. I told her, but she doesn't listen. No one listens to you yet, he said. You're 7. Give it time. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen, and Ryan Mitchell followed his daughter through his apartment that smelled like garlic and his sister's cooking, and he let the ordinariness of it settle around him like something he needed. He ate lasagna. He helped Emma with a worksheet about fractions. He read 2 chapters of the book she was working through, a story about a girl who trained horses, which Emma had strong opinions about in terms of accuracy. He sat on the edge of her bed until she fell asleep, and then he sat there a little longer, because sometimes that's what the job required. He checked his phone. 1 text. Unknown number. Different unknown number than before. Smart man. But smart isn't always safe. He stared at it for 30 seconds. Then he called the police detective who had contacted him in the first days after the accident. A Detective Reyes who had taken his statement and given him a card and told him to call if he thought of anything relevant. The phone rang 4 times. Mitchell, Reyes said. I was going to call you tomorrow. I've received 2 texts from unknown numbers, Ryan said. Both threatening in tone. Both sent since this afternoon. A pause. Send them to me. Screenshot format. I'll see what we can trace. Is there anything new on the vehicle? Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contained information someone was deciding whether to share. Off the record, Reyes said. Off the record, Ryan said. The brake system didn't fail. It was overridden. Someone with technical knowledge accessed the vehicle's electronic control unit remotely. A beat. This was not opportunistic. This took planning and access. Ryan was quiet. How many people could do something like that? He asked. To a vehicle like hers, with that level of access, not many. And not without knowing her schedule, her route, and her vehicle identification. Reyes paused again. Someone very close to her, Mitchell. That's where this points. Ryan ended the call and sat in the dark of Emma's room for a long time, listening to his daughter breathe. Then he sent the screenshots to Reyes. Then, he typed a text to Evelyn's number, which Marcus had given him for emergencies, and sent it. "Call me when you wake up. Important." He put the phone on the nightstand. He did not sleep well. The morning was Emma's breakfast school drop-off, the 20-minute routine of locating her other shoe, finding her backpack, arguing briefly about whether she needed a heavier jacket, determining that yes she did, and standing on the sidewalk watching her walk through the school doors before he allowed himself to shift back into the other current of his life. His phone rang before he reached the car. "You said important," Evelyn said. He told her about Reyes, about the electronic override, about what it meant, the level of access, the planning, the proximity. She was silent for so long he checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "You're still there," he said. "I'm here," she said. Her voice had gone flat in the particular way of someone containing something very large in a very small space. "I need to see you. I'm on my way." He drove across the city and took the elevator to the 18th floor, and she opened the door before he knocked, which meant she had been watching the hallway camera. Another detail that told him something about the woman, about how she lived, about the constant low-grade vigilance that had become so normalized, she probably didn't register it as vigilance anymore. She was dressed, properly dressed, not hospital clothes, the careful armor of a CEO even at home. He understood that choice. Sometimes you put the armor on not because you're going somewhere, but because you need to feel like yourself. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She paced. He had not seen her pace before. She had been horizontal in the hospital, controlled in the elevator, measured in every interaction. The pacing was new. It was, he realized, the most unguarded physical thing she had shown him, the body betraying what the face was working to contain. "Someone on my executive team," she said. "Someone with access to my vehicle, my schedule, my route." She stopped pacing. "That is 6 people, Ryan. 6 people who have been with me, some of them for years." She stopped. "One of them tried to kill me." "Yes," he said. There was no softer way to say it. She resumed pacing. "Nathan has the most motive," she said. "He has cultivated the board relationships. He has positioned himself. He has—" She stopped again. "But motive is not evidence." "No, but it's a start. Reyes is pursuing it. Reyes is pursuing the technical side. The vehicle, the access logs, the remote override." Ryan leaned forward. "But there's another side, the information side. Someone leaked the accident to the press within 6 hours. That's a different kind of access. That's someone who knew what happened almost as it happened." Evelyn turned and looked at him. "Or someone who was watching," she said slowly. "Or someone who caused it," he said, "and had the press contact ready before it happened." The word sat between them, premeditated. "I need to get back into the office," she said. "You were discharged yesterday." "I know when I was discharged, Ryan." "Your body." "My body will manage." She said it without drama, as simple fact. "If I stay out of that building, Nathan controls the narrative. He controls what the board hears, what my team believes, how the story of my absence is written." She looked at him directly. "I cannot let him write my story." Ryan thought about that. He thought about it honestly, weighing her determination against her physical reality, weighing the risk of her being in that building against the risk of her being absent from it. 2 days, he said. "Give yourself 2 more days. Let Reyes work. Let me do some background on the access logs. I work with hospital equipment systems. I know electronic control architecture. I might be able to identify what kind of technical knowledge the override required and narrow the field." She stared at him. "You can do that." "I can try," he said. "I'm not a forensic investigator, but I understand electronic systems, and sometimes an outside eye sees things the official investigation misses because the official investigation is asking official questions." She was quiet for a moment. 2 days, she said. 2 days. She sat down. Not on the couch across from him, in the chair upright, the posture of a meeting rather than a recovery. He recognized the choice. She needed this to feel like action, not waiting. "Tell me about your company," he said. "Not the official version, the real version. Tell me about the 6 people on your executive team." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm going to be in that building with you," he said. And I need to know who I'm walking next to." She considered him for a moment. Then she began. She told him about Marcus' assistant. Loyal, possibly the most genuinely trustworthy person in her orbit, which she had tested in small ways over the years, and he had passed every time. She told him about her CFO, Diana Reeves' 15 years in healthcare finance. Technically brilliant, emotionally remote. The kind of person whose loyalty lived entirely in professional excellence and would not extend to personal risk. She told him about the head of operations, a man named Garrett Cross, who had joined 4 years ago with impeccable credentials and had steadily, quietly built relationships with every department head in the company. When she said Garrett's name, something in her voice changed. Ryan caught it. "What about Garrett?" he said. A pause. "He and Nathan golf together," she said. "I always assumed it was normal executive socialization. She stopped. "I am reconsidering that assumption. Recently. Right now," she said. "Talking to you." He nodded slowly. "Who else?" She continued 2 more team members, both of whom seemed genuinely peripheral to any real risk. And then she stopped. "That's 5, Ryan said. "You said 6. A silence. "The 6th is my head of security," she said. "Daniel Park. He has managed my personal and corporate security for 7 years. Ryan waited. "He is the person," she said carefully, "who would have had the most direct technical access to my vehicle systems." The silence that followed was different from the others. It had more weight. It had the particular density of a truth that changes the shape of everything around it. "Do you trust him?" Ryan asked. "I did," she said. 7 years. I trusted him completely. "And now?" "Now I don't know what I trusted," she said. "Which is the worst thing. Not the fear of the specific person, the loss of the certainty." She looked at her hands. "I built everything on knowing who was around me, on reading people correctly. And if I was wrong about someone for 7 years..." She stopped. "It doesn't mean you were wrong about everything," Ryan said. "It means my judgment failed." "Your judgment was manipulated," he said. "Those are not the same thing." She looked up at him. "You keep doing that," she said. "Doing what? Reframing things." Her voice was not quite soft, but it had lost its operational edge. "Every time I say something that blames myself, you find the other way to look at it." "I'm not doing it to be kind," he said. "I'm doing it because it's accurate. There's a difference." She held his gaze. "I know," she said quietly. "That's what makes it..." She stopped. "What?" A pause. "Useful," she said, and he had the distinct sense that was not the word she had started to reach for. He let it stand. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Reyes, a text, "Found something. Can you come in this afternoon? Bring Carter if she's able." He showed Evelyn. She was reaching for her jacket before he finished reading. Detective Reyes worked out of a midtown precinct that smelled like old coffee and managed paper, and he met them in a conference room with a closed door and the expression of a man who had stayed up later than he'd planned. He slid a printed photograph across the table. "Parking structure access log," he said. "Your building, Ms. Carter. 5:43 a.m. on the morning of your accident." He tapped the photograph. "That card swipe belongs to a key fob registered to Daniel Park, your head of security." Evelyn did not move. "He has legitimate access," she said. "Yes," Reyes said. "He does, but his shift didn't start until 8, and his key fob was also used at a building access point 40 minutes later on the other side of the city." He paused. "Either he has very unusual commuting habits, or someone else was using his fob in that parking structure at 5:43 in the morning." "Or his fob was cloned," Ryan said. Reyes looked at him. "Exactly what I was thinking. Which means either Park is our man, or Park's access was compromised, and he may not even know it." Evelyn's jaw was tight. "Can you determine which?" "That's what I need from you," Reyes said. "Access to the full security system logs, everything. Not just the parking structure, the vehicle bay access, the maintenance records, the electronic control system's firmware access history." "You'll have everything by end of day," Evelyn said. She said it without hesitation. Without the resistance that someone with something to hide would naturally show. She said it the way someone says something when the only thing they want is the truth, regardless of what the truth turns out to be. Reyes looked at her, then at Ryan. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatic, but real. A quiet recalibration. "I'll also need to speak with each of your executive team members," he said. "One at a time, informally initially. But I want to look each of them in the eye." He paused. "Including Blackwood." Evelyn nodded once. "Good." Reyes stood. "Ms. Carter, off the record. You had a close call. A very close call. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, and they knew your patterns. They knew you well." He looked at her directly. "I want you to be very careful about who you let close to you until we know more." "She's not alone," Ryan said. Reyes looked at him. "She won't be," Ryan said. Reyes held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. They left the precinct and stood on the sidewalk, and the city moved around them with its complete indifference, and Evelyn was very quiet, and Ryan didn't push it. Then she said, "I need to go into the office tomorrow." "Evelyn, not to work," she said. "Not to perform, to watch." She turned to look at him. "When they see me walk in, they will react. Everyone reacts. Even people who are very good at controlling themselves, there's always a half second. A micro-expression. Something." She looked at him steadily. "I need to see that half second from each of them." Ryan thought about it. He thought about everything Reyes had said. He thought about the access log and the cloned fob and the weight of 6 people, one of whom had tried to kill the woman standing next to him. "Then I go with you," he said. She looked at him. "The husband," he said. "Coming to make sure his wife doesn't overdo it on her first day back." He held her gaze. "Nobody questions that. And I'll be watching them too." She was quiet for a moment. "You're very good at this," she said. "I'm good at keeping people safe," he said. "I've been doing it a long time." He meant Emma. She understood he meant Emma. But she also heard, he could see her hear it, that he meant her too. That somehow in the space of 6 days, and one false name, and one impossible arrangement, she had entered the radius of the people Ryan Mitchell kept safe. It should have felt presumptuous. He half expected her to say something precise and deflecting about not needing protection. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Ryan." The way she said his name had changed somewhere in the past 24 hours. He had noticed it without cataloging it. It was less careful, less deliberate. It came more naturally now, like something that had found its own groove. I thought about that on the drive back. He thought about it while he cooked dinner for Emma and listened to her explain a complicated injustice that had occurred at recess involving a handball and someone named Tyler. He thought about it while Emma brushed her teeth and made him inspect her work afterward because she was meticulous about things she cared about. He was thinking about it when his phone rang at 9:47 p.m. and he saw it was Evelyn's number and answered immediately. "Is something wrong?" he said. "No." A pause. Another pause. Longer. "I don't sleep well," she said. "I haven't slept well in a long time. And I was sitting here and She stopped. He waited. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "Before tomorrow, before the office and the watching and all of it." "All right." "The medical expenses," she said. "For 3 of my employees' families. Hartley's youngest needed a surgery last year. Their insurance didn't cover the full cost. I covered the rest anonymously. Patricia in operations had a mother in a care facility that was about to be shuttered. I arranged the transfer to a better facility and covered the cost difference." She paused. "Wendell in IT, his son has a condition that required a specialist in Boston. I paid for the travel and the appointments." Ryan said nothing. He was listening. "Nobody knows," she said. "None of them know it came from me. Marcus knows because he processes the payments, and he would never say anything. But the employees themselves—" She stopped. "They think it was a foundation grant, an anonymous donor, something impersonal." "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because tomorrow when we walk into that building," she said, "you are going to see a version of me that is polished and controlled and strategic. And I want you to have seen this version first. The one that paid for Wendell's son's specialist, because she couldn't stand the thought of a child not getting what he needed. Her voice was very quiet. I am not always the version people think they're managing. Ryan sat in the dark of his living room for a moment. I know, he said. You don't, she said. You've known me a week. I know, he said again. I saw you with Rosa yesterday. You redirected her tears into a task so she could keep her dignity. I saw you with Marcus. You protect him without making it look like protection. I saw you with Reyes. You gave him everything he asked for without hesitation, because the only thing you want is the truth. He paused. I know who you are, Evelyn. Not all of it, but enough. The silence on the phone was very still. Ryan, she said finally. Yeah. Thank you for not leaving. Her voice for just a moment carried something unguarded and real underneath the precision. When you got that text, when you found out how serious this was, thank you for not deciding it was too much. He thought about that. About the moment in the hallway with his hand near the door. About the elevator and the 18 floors and the choice that hadn't entirely felt like a choice. Some things, he said, you don't walk away from. Not because you can't, because you don't want to. She was quiet. Get some sleep, he said gently. Tomorrow we walk in together. He heard her exhale, that same real exhale from the hospital room, the breath of someone releasing something they'd been holding. Tomorrow, she said. He hung up, and he sat in the dark for a long time, and he thought about the woman who paid for surgeries and specialist visits and care facility transfers, and then made sure no one ever knew it was her. He thought about what it cost to be that person in a world that only saw the $400 million company. He thought about loneliness that was so complete and so long-standing that a person stopped recognizing it as loneliness and just called it the condition of being powerful. I thought about how for the first time in 4 years he had gone to sleep the previous 2 nights thinking about something other than Emma's schedule. He did not make too much of that, but he did not dismiss it either. The next morning they walked into Carter Global together. The lobby was glass and steel, and the particular hush of an important building. People turned when they saw her. There was a Ripple staff at the front desk, people crossing with coffee, someone who stopped mid-step at the elevator bank. Ryan watched all of them. Evelyn walked with the posture of someone who had never been in a hospital bed, never been in surgery, never spent 4 days unconscious. Whatever pain she was managing, it was managed completely. The CEO was back, and she had brought herself with her, and the building felt it. Nathan Blackwood appeared at the end of the lobby. He had been waiting. Ryan saw the micro-expression Evelyn had described that half-second. Nathan's face went through something fast and complex, surprise, recalculation, and then very briefly, something that looked like anger at having been surprised. Then the performance face arrived. Warm, professional, delighted. Evelyn, he said. You look extraordinary. I didn't expect you today. I know, she said pleasantly. Nathan's eyes moved to Ryan with the expression of a man encountering a variable he had hoped would have resolved itself. Ryan, Nathan said. Careful, controlled. Nathan, Ryan said, equally controlled, with the specific quality of a man who had made a decision and was entirely at peace with it. The board will be so glad to see you, Nathan said to Evelyn. I've been keeping everything running smoothly in your absence. I'm sure you have, she said. We'll go over everything this afternoon. She walked past him toward the elevator. Ryan walked beside her. And in the elevator, just before the doors closed, Ryan looked back at Nathan Blackwood standing in the lobby watching them go. The performance face had slipped, just slightly, just for a second. But Ryan saw it, and what was underneath it was not the expression of a man who was glad his colleague had recovered. It was the expression of a man recalculating how to finish something he had already started. The elevator doors closed. Evelyn looked straight ahead. You saw it, she said quietly. I saw it, he said. So did I. The elevator rose. Neither of them spoke again. But between them, in the silence of the ascending elevator, something had shifted into place. Not the strategic arrangement of the hospital room, not the careful agreement of two people managing a situation. Something more than that. Something that had been building for 6 days in hospital chairs and late-night phone calls, and the particular intimacy of two people navigating real danger together. Something neither of them had named yet. But it was there, rising with them, all the way to the top. The first board meeting after Evelyn's return was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m., and by 9:55, Ryan had already identified 3 things that were wrong. The first was the seating arrangement. When he and Evelyn arrived, the chairs had been reorganized subtly, the kind of subtle that required intent, so that Nathan Blackwood's position was adjacent to the head of the table rather than along the side. It was a physical claim, a staging, the kind of thing that announced without words that the hierarchy had shifted in someone's imagination during the 2 weeks Evelyn had been absent. The second was the stack of documents at every board member's place. Prepared materials, thick, organized, tabbed. Ryan picked up the copy nearest him, while Evelyn spoke quietly with Marcus at the door, and he flipped to the first tab and read the header, Operational Continuity Assessment, Carter Global Foundation, prepared by N. Blackwood. He set it down precisely where he found it. The third thing was Garrett Cross, who was standing near the window speaking with 2 board members Ryan had seen at previous company events, and who looked up when Evelyn entered and held the look exactly 1 second too long before arranging his face into welcome. Ryan had been in enough emergencies to know that the seconds that gave things away were always the ones people thought no one was watching. He was always watching. Evelyn took her seat at the head of the table without acknowledging the rearranged chairs or the prepared documents, or Garrett's 1-second delay. She sat down with the complete authority of a woman resuming something that had never actually stopped belonging to her, and the room reorganized itself around her the way rooms do around people who are entirely certain of where they stand. Nathan arrived last. It was a choice. Arriving last was always a choice. He moved to the chair he'd positioned for himself, saw Evelyn already seated, saw Ryan to her right, and for one brilliant half-second, the performance face showed the seam. Then he sat down and smiled. "Evelyn," he said, "the room is yours." It was perfectly said, generous, collegial, the kind of thing that sounded like deference and was actually a frame, his words placing her in the room. He had prepared in the meeting he had staged, surrounded by documents he had written. Evelyn looked at him. "Thank you, Nathan," she said. And then she didn't use the materials he'd prepared. She didn't reference the operational continuity assessment. She opened from memory revenue figures, project timelines, personnel updates with the fluency of someone who had spent her recovery not simply resting, but reading every report, every email, every data point that Marcus had quietly forwarded to her tablet. Ryan watched Nathan's expression calibrate in real time as he understood what was happening. The room he'd prepared was being dissolved around him, replaced by a room Evelyn had built in her absence, and there was nothing visible to object to because she was doing it with perfect professionalism. It was, Ryan thought, one of the most precise things he'd ever watched another person do. 40 minutes into the meeting, Nathan moved. "Before we continue," he said with the measured tone of someone raising a concern reluctantly for the good of the group, "I think the board deserves to address something directly." He paused. "There are questions, understandable questions, about the circumstances of Evelyn's accident and whether the ongoing investigation creates any liability for the company's public positioning." Silence. "Additionally," Nathan continued, "the board has a fiduciary responsibility to evaluate leadership continuity. Not as a challenge to Evelyn's capabilities, her record speaks for itself, but as responsible governance." He looked around the table with the expression of a man being eminently reasonable. "I've prepared an assessment that outlines a framework for replacing me," Evelyn said. The room went very still. Nathan's expression didn't waver. "For ensuring operational stability during an unprecedented..." "Nathan." Her voice was level. Not loud, not emotional. Level in the way a straight line is level, no deviation, no give. "You prepared a succession framework while I was in surgery. You briefed board members individually before I returned. You repositioned your chair at this table and had a 40-page assessment printed and bound and placed at every seat." She paused. I am going to give you one opportunity to tell me why none of that constitutes a conflict of interest." The silence was complete. Every person in that room was doing the math, the rapid, instinctive calculation of people trying to determine which direction the power was running. Nathan looked at Ryan. It was brief, deliberate. The look of a man deploying a prepared argument. "With respect," Nathan said, "the board also has legitimate questions about the nature of Evelyn's personal circumstances. A relationship of uncertain duration with a man whose professional background has no connection to our industry." He let it hang. "These things affect perception. They affect the confidence of our investors and our partners." Ryan felt the shift in the room, the particular atmospheric change of people who are deciding whether to be persuaded by something. He kept his face completely still. And then Evelyn did something Ryan did not expect. She looked at him, not performing it, not staging it for the room. She looked at Ryan the way a person looks at someone when they are about to say something true, and they want to be facing the right direction when they say it. Then she looked back at the board. "I am going to tell you something about Ryan Mitchell," she said. "Not because this room has earned it, but because clarity is more useful than performance right now, and I have spent enough of my life performing for people who were not worth the effort." Nobody moved. "Ryan pulled me from my vehicle on the morning of my accident," she said. "He had no reason to stop. He was on his way to work. He is a hospital equipment specialist with a 7-year-old daughter and a job he is very good at, and a life that has nothing to do with this company. He stopped because someone needed help. He stayed at that hospital for 4 days because the medical team needed a contact person, and he could not bring himself to leave someone alone." She paused. "He did not ask me for money. He did not ask me for access. He did not ask me for anything. When I told him the situation was dangerous, his first question was not about himself. It was about whether his daughter would be kept out of it." The room was very quiet. "Nathan has spent 9 years in this company asking what he could get from it." Evelyn continued. "Ryan Mitchell spent 4 days at my bedside asking what I needed. I will let this board decide which of those two things tells you more about a person's character." Nathan's jaw was tight. "Evelyn, this is not relevant to the governance question." "It is the only relevant thing," she said. "Because what you are actually asking this board to believe is that a woman who survived a tampering attempt on her vehicle, who conducted a full operational review from a hospital bed, who walked into this building 2 weeks ahead of her medical team's recommendation and delivered a flawless briefing from memory." She paused. "You want them to believe that woman is emotionally compromised because she trusts someone who was kind to her." A board member at the far end of the table, a woman named Carol Whitfield, whom Ryan had clocked in earlier meetings as someone who listened more than she spoke and spoke only when she had decided something, said quietly, "Nathan, did you prepare that succession framework before or after Evelyn's accident?" The question landed like a stone. Nathan turned to her. "It was prepared as a contingency." "Before or after?" Carol said. A pause that was 3 seconds too long. "The initial drafting began the day after the accident," Nathan said. "The day after," Carol said. "Yes. While Evelyn was in surgery. As I said, it was a contingency." "Stop." Carol's voice was quiet and final, the voice of a woman who has been in enough boardrooms to know exactly when a line has been crossed. She looked at Evelyn. "I believe the floor is still yours." Nathan looked around the table. Ryan watched him do it, the rapid inventory of faces looking for the 4. He'd cultivated the alliances he'd built over 3 years of dinners and golf and careful social architecture. 2 of those 4 were looking at the table. One was looking at Carol Whitfield. One was looking at Evelyn. Ryan watched Nathan understand in real time that the architecture had not held. "There is one more thing," Evelyn said, "which I want to address directly because it will become public within the next 48 hours regardless." She looked around the table. "Detective Reyes of the NYPD has confirmed that the brake override on my vehicle was remotely executed using technical access that was tied to a specific security credential. That credential has been traced. An arrest has been made." The room erupted, not loudly. These were people who controlled their noise, but in the specific contained way of a room where every person has just had their breath taken from them simultaneously. Nathan went white. Ryan watched it happen. The color leaving his face was not guilt, or not only guilt. It was the specific pallor of a man who has just realized that the game board he was playing on had more pieces than he knew. Garrett Cross was arrested this morning, Evelyn said. He has been cooperating with the investigation. She paused. It appears that the plan did not originate with Garrett. He was a technician. The electronic override required someone with the authority to commission it. The silence was absolute. Nathan pushed back from the table. I need to call my attorney, he said. I imagine you do, Evelyn said. He stood. His face was still arranged into a kind of control, but it was the control of a man holding something together, by sheer reflex, the muscle memory of composure, without the actual composure behind it. He walked to the door. He stopped, his hand on the frame. He turned and looked at Ryan. It was a long look. It was the look of a man who had tried to use Ryan's presence as a weapon, and watched it become instead the one thing that had held the entire structure together. Then he left. The door closed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Carol Whitfield said, I move that the board place Nathan Blackwood on immediate administrative suspension, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. A second came immediately. 3 more joined. The vote was 6-0. Evelyn called it. Ryan sat very still. When the meeting broke quickly, the way meetings break when something seismic has happened, and people need to locate their footing, board members spoke quietly with each other, with Marcus with Evelyn. Ryan stayed in his chair and did not perform anything. He was not the story. He had never wanted to be the story. I was watching Marcus, who was standing near the door with the tablet pressed to his chest, and the expression of someone who had been holding his breath for 2 weeks and had just exhaled. He was watching Carol Whitfield, who caught his eye across the room and gave him a nod that was very small and completely genuine. I was watching Evelyn, who was speaking with 2 board members, with the complete gathered focus of a CEO who had just won something significant and was already thinking about what came next, because that was who she was. A woman whose mind was always already at the next thing, the next problem, the next person who needed something. And then she looked at him. Across the room. Past the board members and the marble table and the documents Nathan had prepared that nobody would ever read again. She looked at him. And the expression on her face was not the strategic expression of a woman who had used someone well. It was not the measured gratitude of a CEO acknowledging a useful asset. It was the expression of a person who had been seen. Ryan understood that look. He had worn it himself once years ago when Emma was 18 months old, and he'd been functioning on no sleep and impossible grief, and Julie had shown up at his door with groceries and said nothing about how hard it was and just come in and made dinner and stayed. He'd worn that look then. The look of someone who had stopped expecting help and received it anyway. He held her gaze. Then he looked away, because some moments needed space to be what they were without being named too quickly. The room emptied gradually. Marcus remained longest coordinating with legal. Ryan waited, not because he'd been asked to, but because he had decided he was not leaving until Evelyn was ready to leave, and that was simply how it was. When the last person had gone, Evelyn sat back down at the head of the table. She sat there in the quiet of the room, and Ryan watched something release in her, not collapse, not surrender. Release. The way a held note finally resolves. It was Garrett, she said, not Daniel. Garrett Cross accessed Daniel's credential remotely. Daniel had no idea. I know, Ryan said. Reyes told me this morning. She looked at him. When this morning? Before we came in. He paused. I didn't tell you before the meeting because you needed to deliver that room, not manage my news on top of it. She looked at him for a long time. You made that call? She said. Yes. Without asking me? Yes. He held her gaze. Was I wrong? A pause. No, she said. You were right. She said it like someone who didn't always find it easy to say that. That was exactly right. He nodded. She folded her hands on the table. Nathan commissioned it, she said. That's what Garrett told Reyes. Nathan didn't touch anything himself. He used Garrett as the instrument, and Garrett used Daniel's credential as the key. She paused. 7 years. Garrett was with us 4 years, and Nathan 3 more before that, and neither of them. She stopped. People are complicated, Ryan said. That is an extraordinarily understated response to attempted murder. I know. He paused. But the opposite, making it as large as it is, naming all of it, sitting in the full weight of what it means that 2 people you worked with every day were capable of that. He looked at her steadily. You can do that later, somewhere safe, not in this room. He paused. Not yet. She looked at him. When do people do that? She said. Sit in the full weight of it. When they have someone to do it with, he said simply. The words sat between them. Not heavy, not charged with performance. Just true, the way simple things are true when they're said plainly enough. Evelyn looked at the table, at her hands, at the documents no one had touched. I want to change something, she said finally. What? The company. She looked up. Not the structure is sound, but she searched for the word. The soul of it, what it orients toward. I've been building a healthcare company that talks about people and serves numbers. I want to build one that talks about numbers and serves people. She paused. Single parents on my staff who are managing everything alone, there's no support structure for them. Flexible hours exist on paper and are quietly penalized in practice. Benefits cover the employee, but leave the family scrambling. She looked at him. I didn't see it clearly until you. Until me, he said. Until watching you, she said. The phone with Emma's allergies as her contact name. The way you calculate everything twice because you're the only one doing the calculating. The way you stay wherever you're needed because leaving isn't an option your character allows. She paused. There are people in this building doing that every day with no acknowledgement and no support. Ryan was quiet for a moment. You noticed the phone, he said. I notice things, she said. It was what he'd said to her the first morning about the coffee with cream. She said it back to him now with the small private awareness of 2 people who had begun to build a shared language without quite intending to. He looked at her. She looked at him. The programs, he said. The support structures for single parents and working families. You're going to build them. Yes, she said. They'll push back, he said. Some of the board, the investors who care about margin above everything else. They always push back, she said. I built this company with people pushing back. The Boston team still works here because I understood that people are not assets to be liquidated. She paused. I can absorb the pushback. What I couldn't absorb was not knowing what I was building it for. Ryan looked at the woman across that table, the woman who paid for Wendell's son's specialist and never told him, who redirected Rosa's tears into a task so she could keep her dignity, who had walked into a room that had been staged for her removal and dissolved it with nothing but preparation and truth. You knew what you were building it for, he said. You just needed someone to show you that you could say it out loud. She held his gaze. Ryan, she said. Yeah, when this is over. She stopped. When the investigation closes. When Nathan is dealt with and the programs are running and there's no more reason for... She stopped again. He waited. When there's no more arrangement, she said carefully. What happens? The question was precise and honest, and came from the part of her that had been alone long enough to understand that good things end, and that it was better to name the ending in advance than to be surprised by it. Ryan looked at her. I thought about the agreement in the hospital room. The terms. The temporary and conditional nature of the thing they'd built. He thought about what he'd told himself every day, since that he was there for a reason, for a defined period, for a specific purpose. He thought about Emma, about the radius he'd built around his life, about how carefully he'd maintained the distances that kept things manageable. He thought about all of that. And then he said, I don't know. She blinked. I thought you knew everything, she said. Not this, he said. This one I don't know. He paused. Is that all right? She looked at him for a long, still moment. It might be, she said quietly. Yes. He nodded. Outside, the city moved in its usual relentless way, utterly indifferent to what was happening in this room. Somewhere across town, Emma was finishing lunch at a school table, probably arguing cheerfully about something. Somewhere in a precinct, Reyes was building a case that would hold. Somewhere Nathan Blackwood was sitting with his attorney constructing a defense for decisions he had made in the certainty that he would never be caught. And here in a room that smelled like expensive paper and consequence, Ryan Mitchell and Evelyn Carter sat at a table that had hosted a war they had just won, and they were quiet together in the specific way of people who have stopped performing and started existing in the same space. And it was the most ordinary and extraordinary thing that either of them had felt in a very long time. Marcus knocked and entered. Logistics. The press would need a statement by 4. Legal had questions. The HR director wanted a meeting about communication strategy for the staff. Evelyn stood. The CEO reassembled itself around her, the posture, the precision, the forward-facing focus. But Ryan could see now what lived underneath it. He knew the shape of what was under the armor. He suspected he would always know it the way you always know the shape of something you've seen clearly, even after it's been covered again. He stood too. "I have to pick up Emma at 3, he said. "Go," she said immediately. "Everything here is under control." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ryan," she said, "go get your daughter." He nodded. He reached for his jacket, and as he walked toward the door, Marcus held it open, and Ryan passed through and into the hallway, and he heard Evelyn say to Marcus in the clear, decisive voice of a CEO who had just reclaimed something important, "Get me the HR director first, and tell legal we'll build the statement around what's true, not what's strategic, what's true." He heard Marcus say yes. He heard the door close behind him. He walked down the hallway of Carter Global Foundation, past the photographs on the wall, past the employees who nodded and moved with the particular energy of a building that had just weathered something and come through, and he pressed the elevator button and waited. His phone buzzed. Emma. A text. "Dad? Can we get tacos for dinner? Tyler said something really unfair again, and I think I deserve tacos." He typed back. "Tyler sounds like a recurring problem. Tacos confirmed." 3 seconds later. "You're the best dad in the world. Also, can Biscuit have one? Biscuit cannot have a taco. What if it's a very small taco?" Still no. A pause. Then, okay, but I'm asking again tomorrow." He was smiling when the elevator arrived. He stepped in. As the doors closed, he looked back at the hallway at the building Evelyn had made, the one she was already remaking into something truer, and he thought about what she'd asked him. When there's no more arrangement, what happens? And he thought that he had told her he didn't know, which was true. He didn't know in the way that you don't know the answer to a question you haven't fully let yourself ask yet, because the asking changes things, and sometimes you have to be ready for things to change before you can ask the question. He thought, almost ready. Almost. The elevator descended. He went to get his daughter, and behind him on the 18th floor, Evelyn Carter stood at the window of her office for exactly 30 seconds, which was all she allowed herself, and watched the city with the expression of a woman who had just discovered that strength did not mean what she'd always thought it meant. She had always believed that strength was the absence of need, the ability to stand without leaning, the capacity to carry everything without setting any of it down. Ryan Mitchell had shown her something different. He had shown her that the strongest thing a person could do was know exactly what they were carrying. Set it down when someone offered to help and trust that the person offering wasn't going to walk away with it. He had shown her that by doing exactly that. Every day. For 2 weeks. She turned from the window. She had a company to run. Programs to build. Truth to tell. She had, for the first time in a very long time, something worth building toward. She picked up her phone and called the HR director. And she did not look at the window again. Because she did not need to. Because some things, once you've stopped being afraid of them, stop requiring you to look at them and start simply being true. 3 months passed. Not quietly, nothing. In Evelyn Carter's world, passed quietly, but with the particular momentum of a building that had survived something and decided to become stronger for it. Nathan Blackwood's suspension became termination, became criminal charges. Garrett Cross cooperated fully and received a reduced sentence. The investigation closed on a Tuesday in November with a press statement that Evelyn wrote herself in plain language without the softening that her communications team had recommended. She told the truth. All of it. The board had been nervous. Carol Whitfield had called her personally to say that she respected the decision, but wanted to flag the potential investor response. Evelyn had thanked her and published the statement anyway. The investor response was 3 days of stock volatility, and then on the 4th day, something nobody had fully predicted: a wave of public support so significant that 2 major healthcare partners who had been in negotiation with Carter Global for months called Marcus to accelerate the timeline. People, it turned out, trusted a company that told the truth about hard things more than they trusted one that managed its image perfectly. Ryan had told her this would happen. She had believed him, but she had not been certain. She was certain now. The programs launched in October. Flexible hours, real ones, structurally protected from the quiet penalties that had made the previous policy meaningless. Emergency Family Fund. Childcare subsidy. A dedicated HR pathway for single parents that had been built in consultation with, among others, Ryan Mitchell, who had sat across from Evelyn's HR director for 2 hours one Saturday morning and told her with the precise specificity of lived experience exactly what a single parent actually needed and almost never had. The HR director had called Evelyn afterward and said, "Where has that man been?" Evelyn had said, "Raising a daughter on his own for 4 years, which is why he knows things we don't." She had hung up and stood quietly for a moment, thinking about that. Thinking about how much knowledge lived inside the lives that didn't announce themselves. The arrangement, the one they had agreed to in that hospital room, the temporary and conditional thing, with its defined terms and careful boundaries, had dissolved so gradually that neither of them could have identified the exact moment it changed. It did not end. It transformed. The performance of a relationship became the architecture of one so slowly that by the time either of them noticed, they were already inside it. Ryan was at the building twice a week, then 3 times. Then he was calling Marcus directly about logistics, because it was faster, and Marcus was calling him with scheduling questions, because Ryan had become the person Marcus called. And somewhere in that unremarkable series of practical arrangements, Ryan Mitchell had become genuinely present in the life of Carter Global Foundation in a way that had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with the simple fact that he was useful and honest and could not be made to pretend otherwise. Emma had met Evelyn in September. Ryan had prepared for it carefully, the way he prepared for everything that mattered. He had told Emma the truth, or a version of the truth sized for a 7-year-old, that he had helped someone who had been hurt, and that person had become a friend, and he wanted Emma to meet her. Emma had accepted this with the pragmatic equanimity she applied to most new information, and had immediately asked whether the friend had any pets. Evelyn had no pets. Emma had informed her solemnly that this was something she should consider fixing. Evelyn had looked at Ryan with an expression he would think about for weeks afterward. Not amusement, though there was that. Something more interior. The look of someone encountering a kind of directness so pure and uncalculated that they didn't have a prepared response for it and found to their own surprise that they didn't want one. "I'll think about it," Evelyn had told Emma. Emma had nodded approvingly and moved on to other matters. They had eaten dinner. Ryan had cooked at his apartment, which had surprised Evelyn in a way she didn't quite manage to conceal, because she had not been cooked for in so long that the simple act of someone putting food on a table for her felt like something almost too personal to absorb. She'd sat at his small kitchen table while he finished at the stove, and Emma ran commentary from her chair about the correct amount of garlic in anything. Emma had strong opinions about garlic, which Ryan said she got from him, and Evelyn had looked at the two of them and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't name that night. She named it later, much later. In the dark of her own apartment, in the kind of honesty that only comes at 3 a.m. when there's no one to perform for. She named it belonging, not belonging to them. She was careful about that. Careful about the weight of what she placed on something still forming. But the feeling of being in a place where she did not have to manage herself. Where the garlic conversation was the whole conversation, and that was enough. Where a 7-year-old's question about pets was not something to navigate, but simply something true. She had not felt that in so long she'd forgotten it had a name. It had a name. November came, and the days shortened, and Ryan's hospital equipment contracts expanded 2 new facilities, a partnership with a medical technology firm that had noticed his name in connection with the Carter Global investigation and decided someone with his technical knowledge and obvious competence was worth pursuing. He was building something. Not at Evelyn's scale, he had no interest in Evelyn's scale, but solidly, methodically, with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. Evelyn noticed. She did not say anything for 3 weeks, and then she did. "You're undervalued," she said. They were in her office early evening, the kind of conversation that happened naturally now at the end of days when things had wound down enough to become real. "Your rate structure for the new contracts is too low." He looked up from the document she'd asked him to review. "I know what my services are worth." "I don't think you do," she said. "I think you know what feels reasonable to ask for, which is not the same thing." She paused. "You have technical knowledge that the investigation required specialists to replicate. You identified the electronic override architecture in 48 hours. That kind of diagnostic capability." "Evelyn." "I'm being practical." "You're being protective," he said. "Which I appreciate. But I handle my own rates." She opened her mouth. He looked at her with the patient, immovable expression he used when Emma dug in about something negotiable that she'd decided was non-negotiable. Evelyn closed her mouth. "Fine," she said. "Thank you. I reserve the right to bring it up again." "I know you do," he said. "I reserve the right to give you the same answer." She looked at him. He looked at her. The corner of her mouth moved. He went back to the document. This was what it looked like now between them. This particular texture of ease and friction, and ease again, the natural rhythm of 2 people who had learned each other well enough to push and know when to stop pushing. It was not the careful distance of the hospital room. It was not the strategic choreography of the first weeks. It was something older and more honest than both of those things. It was what happened when performance ran out of reasons to continue. The hospital checkup was scheduled for the 2nd week of November, Evelyn's 3-month follow-up from the surgery. A formality at this point given how completely she had recovered, but her surgeon was thorough, and she had promised herself she would stop managing her health the way she managed her calendar. Ryan drove her. He had offered, and she had accepted without argument, which was itself a marker of how far they had traveled from the woman who had tried to wave off assistance with a healing incision in her side. They were in the hallway outside the examination suite when the nurse appeared. She was the same nurse. Ryan recognized her before she recognized them, the woman from room 412, the one who had set everything in motion, with 6 words spoken in warm professional sincerity. She stopped when she saw Evelyn. "Oh," she said, the real surprise of it unmanaged. "Ms. Carter." Then her eyes moved to Ryan, and the surprise became something warmer. "And?" She stopped. She was doing the math. 3 months. The man who had barely left the patient's side. The word husband she had used, and the CEO's answer that had hung in that room like something irreversible. She looked between them with the particular gentleness of someone who had spent a career learning to read rooms. "So," she said, and there was a smile in it restrained out of professionalism, but real. "Should I still call him your husband?" Ryan felt the question land. He felt it the way you feel something when you've been waiting for it longer than you realized. Not with tension, but with the particular quality of a moment that has been building toward itself for a long time and has finally arrived. He looked at Evelyn. She was looking at him, not at the nurse, not at the middle distance, at him. With the expression that he had catalogued over 3 months as the one she wore when she was about to say something true and had stopped being afraid of it. "Not yet," she said. The nurse's smile adjusted warmth patience, the expression of someone who understood that yet was not nothing, that yet was in fact everything. Ryan looked at Evelyn. She held his gaze. "But I hope someday I can," she said. The words were quiet. They were not performed. They were said in the same register she used for the things she told him at 3 a.m., and the things she said about Wendell's son, and the things she said when the armor was down, and the room was empty, and she was simply herself. The nurse said something gentle and professional about letting them know when the doctor was ready, and she moved on down the hallway, with the tact of someone who understood that she had just witnessed something that did not require her presence. Ryan and Evelyn were alone in the hallway. He looked at her. "Not yet," he said. "Not yet," she confirmed. "But someday. If you're—" She stopped, started again. "If that's something you want." He looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who had called him her husband to protect him before she even knew his name. Who had told him about Wendell's son at 3 a.m. because she wanted him to know who she was before he saw who she had to be. Who had sat at his kitchen table while Emma lectured them both about garlic and looked like someone who had found a room they hadn't known they were looking for. "Evelyn," he said. "Ryan, I pulled you out of a burning car because you needed help," he said. "I stayed at the hospital because I couldn't leave someone alone. I agreed to the arrangement because it was the right thing to do." He paused. "Every step of the way I told myself there was a practical reason, a logical reason, something I could explain to myself without having to look at what was actually happening." She was very still. "What was actually happening?" she said quietly. "I was falling in love with you," he said. "From somewhere around the third day in that hospital chair. And I've been telling myself I wasn't for 3 months because the timing was wrong, and the circumstances were strange, and I have a daughter to think about, and you have a company, and—" He stopped. "And none of that is wrong exactly, but none of it is the whole truth either." The hallway was completely still. Evelyn looked at him with the expression he didn't have a name for at the beginning, the one he'd filed away because it mattered, the one that lived underneath all the precision and architecture and careful management. He had a name for it now. "Ryan," she said. Her voice was doing something he'd only heard twice before, that quality of barely contained the sound of someone who has been containing something for a long time and is deciding whether to put it down. "You don't have to say anything," he said. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just wanted to stop telling myself a story that wasn't true." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "I am going to say something," she said. "And I need you to let me finish it, because I have rewritten it in my head approximately 40 times in the past 6 weeks. And if you interrupt me, I will lose the version that's actually true and default to the one that sounds more controlled." He waited. She took a breath. "When I was in that hospital bed," she said, "I made a calculation. I used you. Not cruelly, I hope not cruelly, but strategically. Because that is what I know how to do. And I told myself that was all it was for both of us. A situation. A necessary arrangement." She paused. "And then you hid the tablet for 3 hours so I would sleep. And you remembered the cream in my coffee. And you sat in my living room and let me talk about Ohio for 20 minutes and looked at me like it was the most natural thing in the world." She stopped. "And I kept making calculations. I kept looking for the strategic reason you were staying. The angle. The thing you wanted." She looked at him directly. "And there wasn't one. There was just you. Exactly as you presented yourself. No angle. No agenda. Just a man who decided someone needed help and couldn't make himself stop helping." Ryan was very quiet. "I don't know how to be in a relationship," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I know how to run a company. I know how to manage a board. I know how to rebuild after someone tries to take everything from me. I do not know how to—" She stopped. "I do not know how to let someone stay without waiting for them to become a risk." "I know," he said. "You know. You've been testing me," he said. "Not deliberately, not cynically, just—" He paused. "Every time things got harder, you watched to see if I left. The texts from the unknown numbers, the board meeting, Nathan." He held her gaze. "You kept watching for the moment I decided it was too much." She did not deny it. "Did I pass?" he said. And she looked at him, and for just a moment, the smallest, most undefended moment, her eyes filled. Not dramatically. Not with the stagecraft of emotion performed for an audience. The real thing. The involuntary, inconvenient, genuine thing. She blinked it back with the reflexive control of a woman who had spent decades not crying in hallways. "Yes," she said. "You passed every single time." He took a step toward her. She did not step back. "Emma likes you," he said. Something that was not quite a laugh moved through her. "Emma told me last week that I should get a fish instead of a dog because fish are easier and she could help me feed it." That sounds exactly like her. "She also told me," Evelyn said, "that you talk about me when she asks why you're on the phone so much." She said. She stopped. A pause. "She said you sound different when you're talking to me. Happier." She used that word. Ryan was quiet. "She's 7, he said, "and she doesn't miss anything." "No," Evelyn said. "She doesn't." He looked at her. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not fast. Not because the situation created it. Because we choose it." He paused. "Because you choose it. Knowing all of it, the daughter, the smaller life, the man who's never going to run a company or play golf with board members." "Ryan," her voice was firm, "do not apologize for what your life is." "I'm not apologizing. I'm describing. Then I'll describe too." She straightened slightly. "A woman who works too much and trusts too little and spent 3 months waiting for you to discover you'd made a mistake." She paused. "That is also a description." "I know," he said. "I'm still here." She looked at him. "I know," she said softly. "That's what I'm talking about." The doctor's assistant appeared at the end of the hallway with a clipboard and the professional cheerfulness of someone who had no idea what they were interrupting. "Ms. Carter, Dr. Halpern is ready." Evelyn straightened. The CEO assembled itself in the practiced, instantaneous way Ryan had watched for 3 months, not coldly, not as retreat, simply as the shape she wore in the world. But she looked at Ryan first before she turned, and the look held everything the hallway conversation had held, all of it compact and real. "Wait for me," she said. "I'll be here," he said. She went in. He sat in the hallway chair and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he thought about Emma saying he sounded happier, and he thought about the coffee with cream he'd remembered on the first morning without thinking about it, and he thought about the night she'd called him at 9:47 just because she didn't sleep well and wanted to hear a voice that didn't want anything from her. He thought about all of it. I was not surprised by any of it. He had known, not in the front of his mind, where he'd been maintaining the practical narrative, but in the back of it, in the place where you know things before you're ready to know them. He had known for a long time. His phone buzzed. "Emma." "Dad, are you at the hospital with Evelyn?" "Yes. Is she okay?" "She's great. Just a checkup." A pause. "Then tell her I said hi. And tell her I changed my mind. She should get a dog. Fish are boring." He typed back, "I'll tell her. Also, can we have tacos again tonight?" "We had tacos Tuesday." "Yes, but Tuesday was 3 days ago." He was smiling at his phone when Evelyn came back out. She saw the smile before she saw what had caused it, and her expression softened in the automatic way it did now when he was caught in something Emma adjacent. "What did she say?" Evelyn said. "She said hi, and she's revised her position on fish. Now recommends a dog." Evelyn sat down beside him in the hallway chair. Not across, not at a professional distance. Beside him. Close the way the chair in room 412 had been close to the hospital bed, the kind of close that means something. "Everything clear?" he asked about the checkup. "Everything clear," she said. "He said I've recovered better than he expected, and that I should probably credit whatever I'm doing differently." She paused. "I didn't explain the specifics." Probably wise. She was quiet for a moment. "Ryan," she said. "Yeah." "I want to try," she said. "The real version. Not the arrangement. Not the performance." She looked at him steadily. "I want to try the actual thing." He looked at her. The hallway was bright and ordinary and smelled like a hospital always smells, and it was the least romantic setting he could have imagined for this conversation, and it was exactly right, because nothing between them had happened in romantic settings. None of it had been staged or idealized. All of it had been real and slightly inconvenient and exactly what it was. "Okay," he said. She blinked. "Okay." "Yes," he said. "Okay, we try the actual thing." "That's it," she said. "I said something I've been rewriting for 6 weeks and you said okay." "I've known for 3 months," he said. "I've had time to prepare a longer response. I chose okay because it's honest and it's enough." She looked at him, then she laughed, a real laugh. Not the small, brief, surprised laugh from the hospital. A full one, unguarded, the laugh of someone who has been caught off guard by joy in the middle of a fluorescent-lit hospital hallway and has decided not to hold it back. It was the best thing he'd heard in years. He watched her laugh, and he felt something settle in the center of his chest. Not the tentative thing from the hospital room hallway. The unnamed thing he'd filed carefully away, but something finished. Something resolved. The sound of a note that had been suspended for 3 months finally landing where it was always going. She stopped laughing and looked at him. "You are the most understated man I have ever met," she said. "You've met too many overstated ones," he said. "That is probably true." He stood. He held out his hand. She looked at it. She looked at him. She took it. They walked out of the hospital together, not performing, not staging, not managing anyone's perception of anything. Just walking her hand in his through the lobby, and through the automatic doors, and into the November air that hit them both with its cold clarity. She stopped on the sidewalk and tipped her face up for a moment. Eyes closed, like someone taking inventory of the moment, cataloging it the way she cataloged everything, but this time not for strategy. For keeping. Then she looked at him. "Emma wants tacos," he said. "I heard she wants tacos every 3 days. Her schedule, not mine." "Can I come?" she asked. He looked at her. At the question asked simply, without the architecture of implication or the management of expectation. Just asked. "Yeah," he said. "You can come." She nodded. Not with performance. With the simple satisfaction of someone who asked for what they wanted and received it, and found that the receiving felt exactly like what they'd hoped. They called Julie to pick up Emma. Julie, who had known something was happening for months and had exercised what Ryan considered heroic restraint in not saying so, and they went to get tacos. The 3 of them at the place on Amsterdam that Emma had declared the only acceptable taco location in all of New York City, based on a rigorous comparison process that had taken the better part of August. Emma arrived and immediately sat next to Evelyn, which she had started doing in September without being asked, and without explaining why, with the uncomplicated authority of a child who had decided something and saw no reason to justify the decision. She told Evelyn about Tyler. Tyler was, it emerged, a child of extraordinary injustice-generating capacity, and Emma had been managing his behavior through a combination of strategic avoidance and pointed commentary that she delivered with the composure of a much older person. Evelyn listened to all of it. She asked questions. Real questions, the kind that showed she had been paying attention, that she remembered the names and the history, and the handball incident from 2 months ago that had started the whole Tyler situation. Emma noticed. She noticed with the particular visible satisfaction of a child who expects adults to half listen and receives instead someone who is actually there. "You remember about the handball," Emma said. "You told me in September," Evelyn said. "It sounded important." Emma looked at her for a moment with the serious assessment of a 7-year-old taking full measure of a person. Then she said, "I think you're good." Evelyn looked at her. "Good. For my dad," Emma said. "I think you're good for him." She returned to her taco with the finality of someone who had delivered a verdict and saw no need to elaborate. Ryan was looking at his plate. Evelyn looked at him. He looked up. She held his gaze with the expression he'd first seen in room 412, the one he hadn't had a name for, then the one he'd filed away because it mattered. The one he'd been watching develop and deepen and become more legible over 3 months. Until now, he could read it as clearly as his own handwriting. He had a name for it now, had had it for weeks. It was the expression of a person who had stopped being afraid of needing something. Emma finished her taco and immediately began making the case for a second one. Ryan said no. Emma said the case was not yet fully presented. Ryan said the case was fully presented and denied. Emma looked at Evelyn. Evelyn said, "I think your father's answer was pretty clear." Emma accepted this with enormous dignity and pivoted to asking whether they could stop for ice cream on the way home. Ryan said absolutely not. Emma said it was November, and therefore ice cream was a form of seasonal celebration. Ryan said that was not how seasons worked. Emma looked at Evelyn again. Evelyn said, "He's right about the seasons." Emma sighed with the specific sigh of someone who has recognized that she is outnumbered by reasonable people and will need to recalibrate her approach. "Fine," she said. "But I want a dog, and I want everyone to remember I said that first." Ryan and Evelyn looked at each other. There was nothing strategic in that look, nothing managed or staged or calculated. It was two people at a table in a taco restaurant in November, looking at each other over the head of a 7-year-old who was already drafting her next argument and recognizing something they had both spent their separate lives believing they no longer had the right to want. Ryan Mitchell had spent 4 years believing that protecting his daughter was the whole of what was left in him. That the space love required was a space he had permanently given to grief, and that what remained was enough because it had to be, because Emma needed it to be, because the alternative was hoping for something he couldn't afford to be wrong about. Evelyn Carter had spent 12 years building something so large that it filled every space where wanting had tried to grow. She had called that strength. She had built an entire identity from the architecture of not needing and worn it so long she had almost forgotten it was a construction. They had both been wrong. Not about the grief or the company or the daughter or the distance. About what remained after all of it. About whether the specific shape of your damage meant you were done. You were not done. That was what they had learned. From a hospital room and a fake marriage and a 7-year-old who gave verdicts without being asked. From a text on a phone that said, "You don't know who you're protecting," and a laugh in a hallway, and a hand offered and taken and not let go. You were not done. A man who saved someone he didn't know, because that was who he was, and a woman who called a stranger her husband, because somewhere beneath the calculation was a person who still knew how to reach for something real. They had found each other in the most ordinary and impossible way, and they had built something true from an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary, and they had learned each other in the places that mattered, and they had stayed. They had chosen to stay. That was the whole story. That was the only story. Not the accident, or the investigation, or the boardroom, or the arrest. The staying. The daily, undramatic, irreversible choice to be present for someone who needed it, and to discover somewhere in the middle of that you needed them too. Emma got her ice cream. Ryan maintained afterward that he had not agreed to ice cream, and that the stop at the shop on Columbus was entirely Evelyn's decision, and he accepted no responsibility for the precedent it set. Evelyn maintained that she had simply identified a tactical opportunity and acted on it. Emma maintained that this was the best day, and that everyone should remember she said that too. Ryan walked them both home. Evelyn first to the building on the east side, where the doorman held the door, and the elevator arrived immediately, and the 18th floor waited with its marble and intention, and he stood in the lobby while Evelyn said goodnight to Emma, who hugged her with the unceremonious fullness of a child who had decided someone was worth hugging and needed no further justification. Evelyn held on. Ryan watched her hold on. She released Emma and looked at Ryan, and the look was very simple and entirely complete. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She got in the elevator. The doors closed. Ryan took Emma's hand, and they walked back out into the November dark, and Emma talked about the dog she was going to eventually convince everyone to get. And Ryan listened, and made the appropriate skeptical noises, and the city moved around them, with its usual magnificent indifference to the fact that something had just been decided. Something permanent. Something real. Not yet, she had said in that hospital hallway with a nurse smiling, and 3 months of becoming behind them. Not yet, but someday. And some promises live in the word, someday, patient and absolute waiting for the moment that ordinary life finally makes room for extraordinary things. Ryan Mitchell had not saved Evelyn Carter because she was a CEO. He had saved her because she was a person who needed help, and that was always enough of a reason for him. And Evelyn Carter had not chosen Ryan Mitchell because he was powerful. She had chosen him because he saw her past the company, past the composure, past the $400 million, and the armor she had built from sacrifice and brilliance and years of carrying everything alone. And what he saw, he did not want to fix or manage or leverage. He simply stayed. And staying, it turned out, was the most profound thing one human being could offer another. They had both needed someone to stay. They had found each other. That was enough. That was everything.